Let's start by making a slip knot. Take your yarn and make a little loop on the table with the tail of the yarn going over on top across the yarn that's connected to the ball. Go through the back side of that loop with pincher fingers and pinch the yarn that's connected to the ball, pulling it through, and you can grab the tail and the working yarn to cinch it up a bit. Make the loop a little bit smaller, put your needle through, and that's considered the first stitch. There are lots of different methods used to cast on. This is just one that I use for the Learn to Knit class. Coming from the slip knot, you see that there's a tail and there's the working yarn. Grab the working yarn with your fist, with your thumb up in the air. There should only be about 3 inches of yarn in between. Wrap it from the outside to the inside of your thumb until you see that X, and put the tip of your needle through the X, cinching it just a bit. Bring it back around from the outside to the inside of your thumb, put your needle through the X, and pull it through. Keep going until you have the correct number of cast-on stitches on your needle, and kind of work to see if you could get the tension fairly consistent as you do this. You want to make sure that you're not tightening it up too much. When you slide those stitches on your needle, you want them to be able to move pretty freely and not be tight on the needle, so don't tug too hard. I'm checking to make sure that I didn't cast on too tightly. The stitches are sliding pretty easily on my needle. I have all of those little bumps lined up on the right side of my needle, and I'm ready to knit. Holding your needle with your cast on stitches in your left hand, take the empty needle in your right hand, and with your working yarn in the back, slide your right needle into that first stitch with the needle tip sliding away from you, forming an X. Your right needle is the back of the X. Take your working yarn and wrap the back needle with your working yarn in a counterclockwise motion, creating a loop on that back needle. Hold on to it with your pointer finger in your right hand. Now you're going to pull the tip of that right needle towards you and dip it under the stitch that we started with. So what we're doing is we just turn that loop or that wrap into a stitch. And now you drop the old stitch off the left needle and we just made a stitch. Let's do it again. We're putting your right needle into the stitch, wrap your right needle in a counterclockwise motion and hold on to that stitch. Dip it under the strand and pop it off at the top. Into the stitch, wrap it in the back, hold on to it with your finger, dip it under that strand coming towards you, and pop the old stitch off at the top. Let's do it again. So we're going into that stitch with our right needle. We're wrapping it, so basically creating a loop. We're wrapping the back needle and pulling that wrap towards us underneath the stitch and popping it off the top. Just remember, this first row that you're knitting is going to be a little bit trickier than the others because these are cast-on stitches. And once you get to the next row, it's going to feel a little bit easier because they're just going to have a little bit more flexibility. But just keep going, putting your needle into the stitch, wrapping it, and pulling that wrap through. What we're basically doing is just making a loop and pulling it through an existing loop again and again and again. At this point, I've worked down my needle and all of my stitches are now on my right needle and my left needle is empty because I've knit all of those stitches. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trade hands, so the needle with all the stitches is in my left hand and the empty needle is in my right. I'm going to make sure that the yarn is going towards the back, the working yarn that's connected to the ball, and I knit into the stitch with my right needle and just make my way down the row once again. After you're finished with all of your knitting, it's time to bind off. Binding off is taking your stitches off of your needle in a way that won't become unraveled. We first start by knitting 2 stitches exactly as you have been knitting all along. So knit 2, this time do it kind of loosely. Then we want to take the left needle in between those 2 stitches and grab that first one. We're going to pull it over the second stitch and drop it off the end of the needle. Then we go back to 2 stitches. So I'm just going to knit 1 stitch here until I have 2 on my right needle. With my left needle, I'm going to pull the first one over the second and drop it off the end of the needle. Then I go back to 2 once again. So I have 2 stitches on my right needle. I'm going to go in fast motion here so that you don't have to watch me do all the stitches all the way across. But every single time I'm going back to 2, and then I'm kind of leapfrogging stitch 1 over stitch 2. It jumps over the second one. Stitch number 1 jumps over the second. I'm doing my stitches kind of loosely here because a loose bind off will result in a nice edge that won't cinch up. It'll be like a nice relaxed edge. But it also, when you keep your tension nice and loose for the bind off, it makes this process easier to do because those stitches aren't so tight. Keep going until you get to that very last stitch, and then I'll show you what to do at the very end. Okay, now I'm coming close to the end. I'm lifting stitch 1 over stitch 2. Now I only have 1 stitch on either needle. I'm going to knit that last one on my left needle till I have 2 on my right. Now just pull stitch 1 over stitch 2, hop it over. And I usually take my needle and kind of stretch out that 1 stitch that's left. So it's kind of a big loop. Now I'm just going to cut my yarn, and usually I leave at least, I don't know, 5 or 6 inch tail, and I'm going to thread that tail through the loop and cinch it up as neatly as I can right on the corner. What we have made is called garter stitch fabric, and it's stretchy and it's warm, and you'll use it a lot in knitting. And look at that pretty bind off. We did it.